Okay, I'll do a nice long-winded intro. Okay. Okay, so we said temple, we said kohanim, we said the source.
I don't give you.
Because I have no voice.
Oh.
So, I will try to sit on.
כן, זה דלוק, אני אגביה את זה קצת יותר חזק, אם קשה לשמוע
I
אותו.
will stick this as close to my mouth as I can. I'm really sorry. By next week, the pollen will be gone and I will have a voice back. Okay, so I remember when my kids were little and we lived in Queens, I sent them to a Chabad Gan. And I remember my son was maybe 3 and he came home and he said, you know, Ima, my teacher told me that we have to do mitzvot because every time we do a mitzvah, Hashem puts a brick in the Beit HaMikdash in the sky, and when the sky is built, then the Mikdash can come down, then Mashiach will bring the Mikdash, when the Mikdash is built, Mashiach will come and bring it down, and that'll be the third Beit HaMikdash. And it was, for a lot of reasons, a beautiful concept to teach children, right? And we're not getting into Chabad philosophy right now, but it was a beautiful concept, and what it sort of, I think, taps into is what this course is really going to be all about, which is the way in which the temple, the Mikdash, the Mishkan, the role that it plays in our collective imagination. Right? We're not going to be we're going to mention sacrifices. We're going to mention next week, for example, the layout of the Mikdash, but we're going to be getting less into the nitty gritty of Sefer Vayikra. And more what I want to spend time on is sort of the way in which the temple takes up this sort of very large space, consciously and unconsciously, by the way. Some things that we associate with Mikdash, we don't even realize derive from the concept of Mikdash. Many things in our modern religious experience derive originally from the Mikdash that we may or may not even be aware of. And so, sorry, this is super annoying. And so what I want to try to do over the course really is to go back to the beginning, to go back all the way to the sources in Tanakh. One of the things that I imagine, right, there's a lot of familiar faces, and I imagine that anyone that's been in any of my courses sort of understands by now, and if not, we'll begin to understand it together this year, is that nothing in Judaism sort of evolves along a monolithic path. Right? There's always things that branch off, always ideas that veer off of other ideas. And what we come to all these 6,000 years into Jewish history is sort of the cumulative effect of all of those ideas and all of those concepts that have been evolving and sort of come together now in the Judaism that we have today. And so what we're going to be looking at is how that sort of cocktail of ideas that we have about Mikdash really derived and evolved, and what were the cultural influences and what were the historical realities that the Jewish people had to respond to that made that cocktail, so to speak. So one of the things that we're going to be doing is that is looking at the concept of temple and what the Tanakh says about the temple primarily from the Pshat perspective. Okay, now, again, for those of you that have been here numerous times, you know that Pshat, when we talk about the concept of Pshat, right, I always say it's one of the most misunderstood terms because we say Pshat and I say translate the word and people say simple, people say obvious, people say basic meaning, right? We think all those things, and that's certainly true to a degree, but those are also relative terms, right? Because what's simple for me could be complicated for you and vice versa. And one of the things that we try to focus on in my courses, oh wait, can I have one at some point when you're done? One of the things that I try to focus on in my courses is the concept of Pshat as what the words or what the ideas or what the symbols meant to the original audience. Right? What it meant to the people that were originally hearing those words from Hashem, either at Har Sinai or from the Nevi'im as the years progressed, what the concepts meant, what the symbols meant, and how it was understood. Now, when it comes to temple, as we're going to see in the coming classes, it's sometimes complicated for us because temples no longer exist. So there are words, there are architectural structures that we can't even imagine, and we can't even begin to understand what it meant because it was a given to the original audience. And so we're going to have to do some digging, archaeological digging, linguistic digging, to try to understand what all of those things meant. Okay. So what I want to do is everyone look, for example, just to give you an idea of what we're going to be doing in the course, everyone look at that top picture over there. What do you see? Yeah. Huh? Right. Big feet and a person's feet inside. Can anyone guess what those are? Those are from, it's a picture taken from outside of the Aindara Temple in Syria, which actually in recent years with everything going on in Syria, unfortunately, has a lot of damage to it. I mean, along with the human toll, the war there really destroyed a lot of fantastic archaeological excavations. But this was taken before that happened, outside of the temple at Aindara. Now, the Aindara Temple was a temple that was contemporaneous with Shlomo HaMelech's temple. It was actually built a little bit before, probably as early as 1300 BCE. Right, Shlomo's was built around, I'm giving very rough dates, 900. And it lasted all the way through approximately 740 BCE, which is only less than 20 years before the Northern Kingdom was exiled. Okay, so the entire, really for more than half of the First Temple period, this Aindara Temple existed. Now, to date, again, we may find a temple tomorrow that's more similar, but to date, in terms of its archaeology, in terms of its architecture, in terms of its design, it's one of the temples that's most similar to Shlomo's temple. And we're going to see in some of the coming classes how it actually, because it remained in such relatively good condition, we're actually going to see in coming classes how it helps us understand our own Beit HaMikdash even better than we do with just the text, that when the words are sort of no longer familiar to us. So what do you see there in that picture? Giant feet and those are the little feet, or the people feet, right? Probably the archaeologist taking the pictures. So those feet are feet leading into the temple in Aindara. Okay, what do you, yeah?
At the Tennis Shiloh a couple of years ago, they have a lecture about the ancient communities that have been excavated that have feet as their shape, and there's a special term for it. So as soon as I saw these, I thought of that foot shape of communities that had been.
I don't know what you're referring to. I'm curious.
Let's get to the Tennis Shiloh.
I will one day. Okay, so if you imagine these giant feet leading into the temple, if you had to throw out a wild guess, what do you think these feet represent or symbolize? And it'll become more clear as we go on today and discuss what temples are. Guys, I'm so sorry. I promise I'll have a voice by next week. I'm so sorry. What would you imagine these footprints represent or symbolize? Of course, it's the God entering the temple. Okay, now this is significant for two reasons, and it really represents a lot of what we're going to be doing in the course. In many ways, the Aindara Temple is really, really similar. We're going to see it had a tripartite division. So it had a Heichal, a Kodesh, and a Kodesh, right? A Kodesh, Chatzer, Heichal, Kodesh, Kodeshim. It had very similar furnishings. It had very similar design, right? And we're going to be using the ancient world to help us better understand what temples were, what they meant to the ancient mind. We're going to try very hard not to superimpose our modern conceptions of spirituality and God onto an ancient Near Eastern temple, because we have to look at Israel as they existed in their cultural context, within their, so to speak, cognitive landscape. But at the same time, we're also, beyond looking at the similarities, we're also going to use the differences that arise to help us understand how our temple was unique, right? So it goes without saying, you could dig as long and as hard as you want by Har HaBayit, you're never going to find giant footsteps. Why? Because we're an iconic religion, which we're also going to spend a little time talking about, right? We don't depict God in images. We're going to have to talk about why that's important and why that's even a concept that we take as a given, right? But that's something that's different. And so it's going to be sort of the flip sides of that coin, these similarities that enable us to understand things, and then also the differences and those ways in which the Mikdash in Israel veer off from the ancient Near Eastern conceptions of God and temple. That's going to sharpen our understanding of what it meant. So I want to just do a couple of things. I want to give you sort of an intro, keeping an eye on the time, an intro of what we're going to be doing in this course, and then start on the first topic today. So the first thing, and one actually very important distinction. I don't know how many of you were in my course on women a bunch of years ago, but sometimes when we distinguish between two words that are often conflated, it spells the difference in our entire understanding of things. So for example, in my women's course, I said there's a very important distinction between the word inferior and subordinate, right? And how we understand the difference between those terms and how we see which term Tanakh sort of defers to when it addresses women changes our entire understanding of how the Tanakh views women. What I want to do for this course is distinguish between two words. primitive and antique. What's the difference?
One is physical and one is mental or cultural.
I think they could both be cultural, right? We use the word antiques for something. And
Antique furniture.
yes, but it's a word that's applied to
But
furniture.
primitive people. So that's it. So one is of something of an object, and the other one is you.
Yes, but you're making us, you're using the assumptions you have about the connotations of the words.
Are you basing this on Hebrew?
No, I'm using an English distinction. How would I, yeah. Okay, excellent. Right, antique refers to something ancient. Right, you can even, if you want to use the word ancient instead of, but I think because we say ancient, we sort of assume something old. Antique means something from a different time, from a different era. Okay, and primitive, and there are no judgments there. There's no sort of assumptions about the thing. Primitive has the connotation of something undeveloped, unsophisticated, perhaps less intelligent, right? All of the connotations that the word carries. One of the things I'm going to ask us to do as we study the ancient world is to try not to confuse ancient and primitive. Okay? At the end of the day, one of the things we're going to realize, and I think we realize this all the time, is that as human beings, we live in an unpredictable world with uncontrollable forces all around us, right? And so nowadays, as modern post-scientific revolution human beings, we like to believe that we're so much more sophisticated and we have control. And so we do all the things that can give us a semblance of control. So we have antibiotics and we immunize and we do all these things. But at the end of the day, we're constantly reminded in small and big ways that at the end of the day, we don't actually have control, right? But the struggle still exists. Ancient man struggled with the exact same things, right? But instead of calling them tsunamis and talking about earthquakes happening under the ocean and then impacting, so they called them storm gods. And instead of calling them microscopic viruses that we inhale when someone's standing close to us, so they called them, right, a magifa, or a plague brought on by the god. So at the end of the day, human beings, right, we've evolved in many ways, but our core need is still exactly the same. And so what I want to try to do is not assume ancient man was primitive, but just to assume that they're from a different era where they had different tools at their disposal, but the struggle is exactly the same. And it's important, I think, to keep that in mind. So that's sort of as intro, okay? Now, some of the things, yeah. Yeah, maybe I should use the word ancient. Yeah, I should use the word ancient. I tried to use the word antique only because I think when people think ancient, they almost associate it with primitive. And when you say antique, like Batya, we assume, pretty Victorian furniture. And so we don't automatically, sometimes language, we don't even realize the impact language has on our subconscious when we say certain words. But I would, yeah, you can throw ancient instead of antique. It has this, yeah, correct. That exactly. Okay, so some of the things I want to cover in the course, can you hear me? You can hear me? Okay. And then I'm gonna start on the first topic. The first thing we're gonna look at, and we're gonna start this actually already next week, we're gonna be looking at the physical abode, what the temple itself actually looked like. We're gonna be looking at the furnishings, and basically what we know and the things we could piece together comes from the Pshat, comes from what Tanakh tells us, and it's actually interestingly a very, very long account of the building of the Beit HaMikdash. Beit HaMikdash is perhaps, other than the description of Achashverosh's palace in the beginning of Megillat Esther, probably the only time we can actually read something in Tanakh and visualize what it looked like. Right? Think about that. There are very few times where Tanakh spends a lot of detail on physical setting. Okay, so we're going to be able to rebuild from that. The other thing, and it's sort of an extension of the physical abode, is beyond understanding just physically how it looked. What we want to look at are the physical structures within what the temples and the symbolism of the temple that's really lost on the modern reader. Okay, because one of the things that happens is that, it's a blessing and a curse that our text is ancient, right? It's a blessing for all the obvious reasons. But the challenge when we're reading ancient texts is that there are words and there are things that we just don't understand the sort of symbolism of, right? So it's the same way 100 years, maybe more than 100, 200 years ago. If you were to go into a time machine and say to someone, yeah, there was this story, or show them a picture, let's say, okay, you walk up to someone from the 1700s and you show them a picture of a man in spandex leggings with an underwear on top of it and a symbol on his chest and a long cape and big muscles. Okay, so we all know that's a superhero. And we all know, okay, so the superhero is going to have a nemesis and there's going to be a girl next door that's plain but pretty and he's going to want her because he's going to want to live a normal life. And we know that there's going to be something that's his weakness, but he's going to try to do good in the world, but he might have a crisis. All of that we know because superhero is part of our culture. Okay, now, if someone from 500 years ago, or maybe even in 500 years from now, sees a picture of a guy in tights and underwear, it may be lost on them. They may have no idea about all the things we assume the minute we see that picture. Okay, that happens with us as well when it comes to Tanakh. There are so many things that ancient minds associated with things like leaves, with things we're going to see next week, like the cedars of Lebanon, with things like kruvim that are lost on us. And the challenge is going to be trying to dig down and understand what the symbolism was, to try to get back into the mind of ancient man. Okay. Now, another thing we're going to talk about is sort of when we get a little bit further on in the course is to move beyond just the original temple of Shlomo and see how the concept of temple developed. One of the things that's going to be surprising is that the way Jews or Israelites in the first temple period interacted with the Mikdash and interacted or imagined Hashem and Hashem's presence is not going to be the same. It's not going to be identical to the way Jews in the second temple imagined Hashem. And it's certainly not identical to the way we imagine Hashem today, right? So the way that Hashem evolves, the way the concept of divine presence evolves in Jewish thought, right? It's never about do we believe or not believe. That's never the question. The question is, how do we believe? What do we believe? What does our belief look like? And so much of that is manifest in the temple itself, okay? Or, as we're going to see, in the lack of a temple and how we fill that void. Okay. Now, the last couple of things really, we're also going to have to address prophecy. Okay. Because one of the things we're going to notice is that the Nevi'im, if you look on the surface level, Nevi'im seem to be very opposed to the concept of cult and the institution of a temple and to everything it meant. And so we're going to have to look at what that was and where that came from and how that also helps us sharpen perhaps what God imagined for the temple and how man's sort of imaginings conflict, if they conflict, and why. We're going to move towards the very end. We're going to get to the concept that I mentioned in the first minute of the class, right? Eschatology. What are we hoping happens? Or when we imagine the far off utopian future that's part of our belief system now, which by the way did not always exist in Tanakh, right? What does eschatology look like? What is this concept of a third Beit HaMikdash? Where does it come from? And how does it influence Judaism today? Okay. And then, of course, we're going to mention a little bit something that I've covered in some of my other classes, which is how rabbinic Judaism was really shaped by the void created by the destruction of the Mikdash. Okay, rabbinic Judaism was very much a reaction to the lack of that center, of that sort of centripetal force. And we're going to talk about that as well. Okay, so I need to ask you to do something because I didn't plan these short source sheets well. I need you to quickly put your hands over the second column of the source sheets and just look at the Shmot side and don't cheat. Okay, so I am going to read to you some psukim. You don't have to concentrate too much on their meaning, but just hear some of the words that are being said and tell me what you think of, tell me what you notice, okay? Vayar Moshe et kol hamlacha v'hinei asu ota ka'asher tziva Hashem kein asu. Right? Vayar Moshe et hamlacha, he's sort of taking it all in. He's reflecting, looking back. Vatechel kol avodat mishkan oel moed. And the work was complete or finished. Vayachal Moshe et hamlacha. Moshe stopped creating. And so he blesses them, the people involved in it. V'kidashta otov et kol kelav, and he blesses, or excuse me, he sanctifies the space. We're going to talk about the concept of sacred space. Moshe made that space sacred. Okay, without taking your hands off, what does this make you think of? Huh? Okay, excellent. So Kiddush, which comes from what? What's that paragraph in Kiddush that you're thinking of? Right, creation, Breshit, right? The creation story. You could cheat now. It's no longer cheating. Vayar, look at the second portion, okay? Vayar Elokim et kol asher asa v'hinei tov me'od. right? Hashem beholds, he looks at all those things he created and it's good. Vayichulu hashamayim va'aretz v'chol tzva'am, vayichal Elokim melachto asher asa, vayivarech Elokim vayikadesh oto. Okay, now again, if we see one word repeated somewhere else in Tanakh, we don't have to automatically assume that Tanakh wants us to read the two stories parallel or in tandem, because sometimes there's just limited vocabulary and you need to use words in more than one place. But when we see something like this, where the language and the phrases so clearly evoke another earlier episode in Tanakh, so then we have to ask, why, right? What does the Torah want us to see? What is being communicated by writing these stories in such a similar fashion that the Tanakh is clearly creating a link between the two, okay? So my question to you is, what's the connection between Mikdash and Shabbat? Or sorry, I take that back. Not between Mikdash and Shabbat, between the creation of the Mikdash and the creation of the world. Okay, excellent. You're going to see that perhaps we're missing one, even though I think that makes perfect sense. We're going to see there's something more to it, but that's an amazing start. What else? Yeah. Okay, so excellent, right? There's something to be said about us designing, creating, right? I think that's similar to what you're sort of alluding to. Just like Hashem was creative, we're creative. Okay, hold that. What else? And we're going to see the word create. The reason I'm saying hold it is because the word create has a very specific connotation in the ancient world that, again, is lost on us. Yeah. What? Okay, so hold that, because so excellent. That's an example of something that is totally true and legitimate, but we're skipping for now. She said malachot, right? The lamed tet malachot of Shabbat, because it's sort of a later, right? It's the Chazal's understanding of where the malachot for Shabbat derive from, the building the Beit HaMikdash. So and of course, meaning where Chazal get it is from this connection, but we're putting that aside just for now, because I want to get back to, right, what would ancient Israel, when they're reading these words and connecting the two episodes, what would they have understood implicitly? Yeah.
Something just sacred space.
Okay, excellent, right? Sacred space and say it, and sacred time, perhaps. Okay, so were you raising your hand? Sorry. Okay, excellent, right? So excellent. There's something here that sort of we're all sensing, right? That there's something here about a place for Hashem. And I think that really, in order to answer the question, we need to go back and look at what the creation story meant. And again, when we say what the creation story meant, we mean meant to the ancient mind, okay? Because today, a modern person will look at the creation story, and there are some fantastic books out there written actually by religious Jews that also happen to be physicists and also happen to be scientists. And they look at the story of creation, and the question they ask, modern people looking at the story of creation ask what? What's the question they ask? How? How did creation happen? How did it begin? Right? They built this huge Hadron Collider to try to mimic the Big Bang and try to understand how things went from. So how things were created, what we essentially as modern people look at when we talk about creation are the material origins. We want to know how things were created. We want to know what they were made up of. We want to know how they came into being. Right? We want to understand the origins, how they went from being simple to complex organisms. We want to try to understand, how do I explain to my child that we go to a museum and they show the evolution from ape to man? And then how do I explain that with humans created on the sixth day? All of those are questions of how, okay? Ancient man asked a very, very different question. Okay, the story of Breshit, and when I say Breshit, I mean any ancient creation myth, because Breshit is just one of the many, many, many versions of, in the beginning, this is what happened. Okay, ancient man had a very different concept. Okay, ancient man didn't really care, for example, what the atmosphere consisted of. They didn't really care about the size or the location of the celestial orbs, moon relative to the sun. None of that bothered them. Ancient man, okay, or ancient cosmology was all about who, but I would say even more why. Okay, so ectional ontology. Okay, excellent. one of the things that we asked, really, okay, the difference was not so much how things were created, okay, but what is their role within the universe? Why is there a sun, for example, in Bereshit? Now, as scientists, we might say, well, the sun is this big ball of gas that, does all the things, gravity and warmth and everything else, right? But ancient man understood the sun as what? Well, so it's interesting. Light was created before the sun. The sun kept track of day and night. It kept track of the cycles, right? So in the ancient world, something existed only if it had a discernible function. Okay, now that sounds crazy, but I'll give you, no, because I'm keeping an eye on the time. I'm just, because we started a little late because of the Zoom. So I'm going to just tell you to look at some of these things, but I'm not going to read all of them inside just in the interest of time. One of the things you'll see when you look at some of these depictions of the before picture, right? The ancient creation story. So they describe what was before, just like we have tohu vavohu, and then they describe what the world was after. And one of the things that you see from the before picture is much like the very beginning. Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. And then what does it say? It doesn't say absence of material. It says v'haaretz hayta tohu vavohu v'choshech al pnei tehom. Choshech is something that was v'ruach Elokim merachefet al pnei hamayim. There was primordial water. There were substances. There were things. But it was tohu vavohu, which means it was disordered. It was chaotic. There was no boundaries were not yet put into place. Things did not have yet a function. Okay, I'll give you an example that I saw, which is actually a great example, okay, to understand what that means, that if something exists, because for example, the Egyptians, in the ancient Egyptian, in their mythopoetic texts, the desert, and this might actually be interesting to think about why Hashem took us straight from Mitzrayim into the desert. The desert in ancient Egypt had no discernible function, so it was almost thought of as not existing. Okay, which sounds crazy, but I'm going to give you an example so you can understand it a little better. If I say to you, okay, someone built a computer, someone builds all the hardware for a computer. Okay, does it exist? Does the computer exist? No, why not? Because the material is there, but it can't function yet. Just because you have all the hardware doesn't mean it's functioning as a computer. Okay, so then someone writes programs for it, but the software isn't uploaded. So is it functioning as a computer yet? Okay, so then what if, right, in theory, it's functional, but there's no power source and you can never actually turn it on? Okay, so again, and then we could keep going further and further. What if it's plugged in, but there's no one in the room to use it? And now we're already getting philosophical, but you understand where I'm going, which is the concept that if something, for all intents and purposes, if ancient man couldn't understand the function of something, it was as if it did not exist. Okay, and the flip side of that is that if we look at Sefer Bereshit, everything is described according to function. And things are only defined as good if they actually can function. So I've given this example in some of the other classes, right? Hashem creates the light and the darkness, and he looks and he says Tov. And then, right, and Hashem goes, what was not after it was created, something was not yet Tov. What is it? Not man, we'll get there. Man was specifically lo tov, right? And it's for the same reason. What was not considered tov the first day after its creation, after that first cycle of Yom Valayla, or Laila Vayom? No, Someone said the waters, okay? Hashem creates the waters, but he doesn't say tov. Why not?
Because they don't have a function.
Because
no, there's plants and things.
Okay, so I'll say even before, there's waters above and waters below, but if waters below are covering the entire earth, they're not tov because they're not doing their function, because the function of water is to, right, above and below, is to provide moisture to the earth. And the water is not separated from land is not water because it doesn't do what it's meant to do yet. Please repeat. Okay, sorry about that. I will repeat. Reminds me, if someone asks a question, just remind me to repeat them so the people on Zoom at home hear it. Sorry about that. Okay, so water is not divided. So Hashem separates the waters above, waters below. There's no tov yet. The next day when Hashem creates dry land and water, and now waters above can function and do what they need to do, and the waters on earth, then we have, as we say, pa'amayim ki tov, right? Because only then is it actually fully functioning. And so in the ancient world, the line between existence and non-existence was not material. It wasn't, as we say, right, creation ex nihilo, how things went from nothing to something. That's not how the ancients thought of it. The ancients thought of it as chaos to order, dysfunction to function. Okay, that's what it was in the ancient world. I'll give you another, right, and I'll give you a really, really good example, and just so you again, to sort of get into the mindset. If someone walks in, if I'm in the middle of a Broadway show and someone walks in 10 minutes late, they're like, oh my gosh, what'd I miss? Okay. I'm not going to tell them about the scaffolding behind where the people are changing costumes. I'm not going to tell them about how people were cast in the play, because all of that is just the preamble to the actual functioning of theater. Right? But what we care about is how things are all moving once it's done, what their function is once it's finished. And so there's something very, very important about remembering this distinction between material ontology, which is what we think about, and functional ontology of the ancient world. Okay. Now, if I think about creation, let's argue for a second that we're thinking of creation as a material phenomenon, right? How did all these things come into be? Then day 7 makes no sense. Why not? Why does day 7 just take up space in the text, but it actually is meaningless if I'm thinking as a material ontology? Because nothing happens, because nothing is physically created, right? So it's not actually day 7, it's just after day 6. Day 7 shouldn't count if I'm thinking as of creation of the world in terms of physically creating physical things, okay? But if I'm thinking of the creation of the world as through the lens of functional ontology, okay, then the 7th day meant something very, very different. Okay, and the difference is based on a piece of information that, again, everyone in the ancient world knew, but that's totally lost on us. Okay, which is, yeah.
Because if day 7 is creating purpose.
But it's not creating purpose. If I'm saying the creation of the world is all about, I look around and I say, oh my God, how did these trees get here? How did people get here? So then I have day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, done. Day 7, nothing is created. So it doesn't belong.
Nothing physical.
Nothing physical, correct.
But the non-physical is physical.
But it's not if I'm looking at the creation of the world through the lens of material ontology. Then day 7 is just an empty space. Nothing was created. So it doesn't have to be day 7. It could be day 1 through 6, and then whatever comes after 6. Right?
I hear what you're saying.
Wait, so tell me what you're...
Because I see space as creation.
Because you are spiritually inclined and you, okay, so because you think more, not like primitive, but like ancient man, and you're more, and I'll tell you where I think, if what I'm sensing is that you think of day 7 more through the lens of functional ontology, which is exactly what the people who were given the Tanakh thought of, okay? What does that mean? That means that on the 7th day, it was understood, it was davar yadua, just like we understand a man in a cape is gonna have superpowers. Davar yadua was that the 7th day in any creation epic was the day of divine rest. Okay. Now, when I say the word rest, what do I mean? When I say to my kids, guys, I had a really long day. I'm going to go down. I'm going to go rest for 10 minutes. Don't make noise. What does that mean?
Halachically, it means no creation. In a secular linguistic sense, it means no work or exertion.
Okay. Right. So when we say rest, right, we imagine, if I tell my kids I'm going to rest, so what we imagine is I'm going to go recede to my room or to my couch, and I'm going to close the door, and I'm going to disengage from my cares, my worries, my tasks. I'm going to make dinner 10 minutes later, but at first I'm going to rest. First, I'm going to recede and remove myself from everything else going on. That's what we think of when we think of rest. We're going to take a nap. Okay. The 7th day divine rest is not a nap. And it's not disengaging. In the ancient world, rest, both for humans and for deities, by the way, is what results when a crisis has been resolved. And again, crisis, I don't mean like emotional crisis. We mean disorder, chaos, okay? And stability has been achieved. And so when things settle down, normal routines can be established and enjoyed. Okay, so Shabbat comes from that basic meaning. I'll read you an example from a pasuk in Yoshua. Okay, if you have your Tanakhs, for future reference, everyone, it goes without saying, always try if possible to bring a Tanakh. But today I have just a couple of psukim here and there. So if you don't have it, you could just listen, you won't miss anything. Yoshua Perek Hey, Pasuk Yud Bet, okay, says, Vayochlu, I'll start back a pasuk. Vayochlu ma'avor ha'aretz mimochorat ha'pesach matzot v'kaloi be'etzem hayom hazeh. So this is when Bnei Israel are getting ready to enter into the land. And it says, Vaya yishbot haman mimacharat. The man, again, man, it's anthropomorphized, right? Man doesn't, right? The man stopped falling. Be'ochlam ma'avor ha'aretz v'lo haya od lifnei Yisrael man. So once that stopped, then what kicks in? That stopped because the crisis in that case, right, the disorder of the desert where they don't have food growing from in the sand, stopped, Shabbat, and now we can begin normal routine, normal living by Teva, where I'm going to plant things and they're going to grow and that's what I'm going to eat. Okay, so semantically, it really refers to sort of the completion of certain activities, which and leads into, right, something else. So what does Shabbat lead into? If I'm resting, I'm again not pulling away from, but if there's a Shabbat, a cessation of those activities, what comes next? Vayishbot Hashem bayom hashvi'i. So that's what we think, because we're thinking rest. Divine rest and human rest in the ancient world is not modern. I'm out. Huh? Okay, and then what? We're getting there. We're Vayat Minucha. Okay, what's Minucha? Yona Matza Bo Manoach. He didn't find a place to rest. What is Minucha? What does that mean that he found Minucha? He found something to eat. That's why he never came back, right? He found food out there. Shabbat, the cessation of what you were doing prior, leads to a new state, which is described by this other word of vayanach. And that verb, really what it refers to is sort of entering into, like you're saying, a position of safety or security or stability. The man stopped falling, and now we're moving into a place where food can grow from the ground naturally. So minucha is the noun that refers to the place where that's found. So look back inside for a second, right? For example, in Shmot Chaf, and we see this perfectly, and this is the pasuk that I think many of you had in mind before when you were linking the two, right? Perek Chaf in Shmot pasuk Yud Aleph. It says, Ki sheishet yamim asa Hashem et hashamayim ve'et haaretz et hayam ve'et kol asher bam vayanach bayom hashvi'i al kain beirach Hashem et yom hashabbat vayikadshehu. Okay, so the state in which normal routines can be established and enjoyed, right? So for deities, this means the normal operations of the cosmos. Now Hashem is resting, there's Menucha, so the sun is going to rise and set, right? Or we're going to revolve around the sun, right? And there's going to be things, and the rains are going to fall when it's their time to fall, and the animals are going to eat from the land, and the bigger animals are going to eat the fish, and that's going to be normal routine. And so God's rest, so to speak, is more a matter, it's not about disengagement, but it's about being engaged without obstacles, because Hashem created order. Okay, that's a really important world. Now, that's important because in the ancient world, divine rest, what would you imagine if God creates, I'm not even going to give it away. God creates this whole world, sets it into motion, and then he doesn't disengage. Divine rest is the same in the ancient world as, if you had to guess, divine enthronement. Okay, what does that mean? Enthronement. God now becomes enthroned. God becomes what? After creation, God then, he rules over the universe he created. Now, again, Really important. I mentioned this book last year. I'll say it again. It's a really critical book to read, even though if you get to the chapter on Tanakh, please see me, because I think he does a terrible job of that one chapter, because he actually does not read the Hebrew Bible. He reads the Old Testament. Right. And even though the words are the same, you cannot read the Hebrew Bible as the Old Testament. So come to me. But this book called The Patterning Instinct by Jeremy Lent is a fascinating book. And it shows us how much Greek thought has influenced our understanding. We think, right, even Rambam talks about this concept, Hashem, right, the watchmaker theory, that Hashem created the world and then steps back and lets Teva run itself. That is not how ancient people thought of Hashem. Okay, ancient people thought of Hashem as taking up his residence in the world that he created. Okay, so I'll give you an example again of this concept of rest sort of on the human level, and then we can extend it to Hashem. Look, for example, in Dvarim Yud Bet, Deuteronomy 12, right, Pasuk Yud there, says that it's Dvarim Yud Bet Yud. Va'avartem et hayarden, vishavtem ba'aretz, asher Hashem Elokeichem manchil etchem, v'heiniach lachem mikol oivechem misaviv, vishavtem betach. Right? There's a sense there that once Hashem gets rid of all of the other threats, humanity can then sit and relax and enjoy. Okay, and then after that, etc., and we're going to get to the extension of how that manifests in the Mikdash. I'll give you one other example. Go to Yoshua, because again, it's that transition period where they're moving from this place of, right, chaos of the desert to a place of the world that they're now going to be living in. Go to Yoshua Chaf Aleph, Pasuk Mem Dalid. Did I write the wrong? I wrote the wrong pasuk. Yeah, there is no. So I wrote the wrong pasuk. Okay, I'm going to give you a different pasuk in that parak. I wrote the wrong pasuk altogether. Hold on. Is it Membet? Did I write down the wrong pasuk? Yeah, thank you. Okay, I should change that in my notes. Thank you. Vayanach Hashem lahem misaviv k'chol asher nishba la'avotam. Right, so Hashem gave them minucha, meaning they don't have to fight anymore. They don't have to be engaged in battle. They can now go to their houses and live their normal lives. They're not sleeping. They're living their normal routines. As long as, right, enemies no longer threaten, as long as then Israel can go about planting and harvesting and buying and selling and raising families and doing all the things that we do. Okay, so the temple is built in the ancient world. Okay, so that the deity can have a center for his rule, because ultimately the entire world is Hashem's rule. But as we're going to see, temples become the hub of God's authority. Okay, and I'll give you an example of this, the concept of rest. After president, he runs for president, he goes through the entire grueling process, and then he's excited to go to the White House. Why? He or she. Why? Why is he excited to go to the White House after the elections? So, okay, so right, that would be right. So fine, but he's not excited just to sleep in the big plush beds. Why is the president excited to enter the White House?
It's the culmination of his dream.
But it's just really the beginning of his dreams, right? Winning is just the means to
become the president.
Which means now he runs the free world. You move into the White House so that you can now begin, right? The elections was just putting everything into place, and you're appointing Secretary of State, and everything is being put. But now he moves into the White House, and now his rule begins. So we have to think again. Lahavdil goes without saying, Elef Alfei Avdalo. But when we think of the concept of temple and the idea of the gods moving into the temples, it wasn't a place of divine rest where God naps. It was the hub of where God rules the world. Okay, now, and that's why it's really, really important. We can't conflate it with, for example, the way we think of a shul. We'll get to that later on. Okay, now, I'll give you a couple of examples from some of these ancient texts, and you're going to see what I'm talking about. Okay, and that's why we're going to see the creation of temples and cessation of creation of the world were always came together. Creations of temples happened after the deities, right? Think of the story. I think some of you might be familiar with some of the other creation myths, right? The Enuma Elish. So you have gods defeating these other chaotic forces, right? Of the chaotic forces of water, of Tiamat or Mot, all these other evil deities, so to speak, that want to bring chaos and want to flood the world with chaos. And then you have one god that ends up becoming exalted. So you have Marduk or you have El, right? And they're able to defeat all those chaotic forces. And then two things happen. They create order, they create the world, and then a temple is built and they are enthroned in that temple, which is the hub of the rule, where they are going to rule the entire world. So again, I'm going to read you a couple of examples here. Look in source 2, for example, okay? It says, earth was in darkness, the lower world was invisible, the waters did not flow through the opening in the earth. Nothing was produced on the vast earth, the furrow had not been made. The high priest of Enlil did not exist, the rites of purification were not carried out. So tohu vavohu and having no priests are the same, okay? Heaven and earth were joined to each other, forming a unit, they were not married. Heaven showed its shining face in Dagon, as its course it could not reach the fields, okay? But then look, for example, and you have here, okay, I'm going to read you, jump down to source 4. No holy house, no house of God had been built in a pure place. No reed had come forth, no tree had been created, no brick had been laid, no brick mold had been created. Not house had been built, not city had been created, no city had been built, no settlement had been founded. The depths had not been built. A redo had not been created. A redo was the palace. Okay, so if there's the temple, there's no temples because there's no order yet, no holy house, no house of God, no dwelling for them had been created. All the world was sea. The spring in the midst of the sea was only a channel. Then Eridu was built, as Sagila was created. Okay, excuse me, Eridu is the city, as Sagila is the temple. So now, and look here, just for example, I brought some of the names of the names that temples were referred to in the ancient world. Just skim the list. What do you notice? What do you notice there? All the names, right? House of the netherworld, house of heaven and the underworld, what? Right, they're the houses, but they speak to their sort of cosmic role, right? It's not that once we're in the middle of history already, some guy decides that now again, by the way, in our story, and this is going to be important, our temple does happen in the middle of history. No Mikdash is built for Hashem in the beginning at the creation. Okay, and that's a really, really, really important difference, which we're going to talk to when we get to David and him wanting to build the Mikdash. Our Mikdash is a product of history. Okay, their Mikdashim are a product of cosmology. The world is created, sun, moon, and the stars, and a temple. Okay, now, yeah.
Just imagine the third temple. Are we supposed to be working on it? Or versus those who say, oh, we'll just put it out. They'll just be.
Oh, I don't know. I can't even weigh in on that. I say, let's just be good. Let's be good people, and whatever happens. No, I hear you, but I'm saying I don't know. But I think, you know what? I think by the end of the course, hopefully, we'll have an answer to that. Meaning, what does a temple mean, and what are we searching for, and what are we hoping for? Right? Well, I think we'll get to that. Hopefully, if not, then you'll tell me. Okay, so now the question is, right? One of the things that we notice in Tanakh is that Hashem, it's very clear, is now, oh, by the way, one thing very important that I do want to say when I said the whole business of antique versus primitive, ancient, one of the things that's interesting in Tanakh, because Tanakh was a polemic against paganism, right? Tanakh was, right? So think about the words we say in Hallel. Right? They're so stupid, they bow down to wood and stones, and we bow down to a real Hashem. The polemic within Tanakh has created the sense that the polytheistic cultures surrounding Israel were sort of stupid and primitive, and they really believed that that wood thing was actually a god. That's really, really not true. Okay, and in the ancient world, even when they too had temples, the temples were believed to be microcosms of the macro. Okay, and statues were believed to be representatives of the god. They didn't actually think the metal guy standing in their temple was a god. Okay, we're going to get back to that, but it's an important distinction. But that being said, okay, one of the things that's important for us to realize is that on some level, two things are happening simultaneously when we're talking about temple. Hashem creates the entire world. And again, when I say Hashem, I mean gods in the ancient world. The gods create the entire world, Okay, in our story, it's only Hashem, always. In their stories, the gods have to duke it out. Okay, the God creates the world, and then, like the president who enters the White House, Vayanach, he can then begin to run the world and keep stability and maintain order. Okay, the temple becomes almost a microcosm of his rule. If Hashem is up there running the world, the temple becomes the place, and we're going to talk more about this in coming classes, where the God is almost concentrated on the earth and we can approach him. Okay, but the Tanakh is very clear that the temple is just a microcosm. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Look in Yeshayahu Samach Vav, for example. Okay. Yeshayahu Samach Vav 66. Okay, we have the following psukim, the first two psukim in that parak. Look in psukim Aleph and Bet. It says, Ko Amar Hashem, Hashamayim Kisi. Right, my throne is up in the heavens. V'haaretz Hadom Raglai. So what does that mean? If God is up in heavens, the land, the earth is his footstool, where he rests his feet. Where could you, how could you possibly, and this is some of the rhetoric we're going to talk about later on, but the Nevi'im are very clear. No temple can house God, because God's temple is the world, right? Right? But then in the same time, right, he's saying, El ani unechei ruach v'chared al dvari. Hashem is saying, I pay attention to man, but no temple can house me because my temple is the universe. Okay, yeah. Exactly. So that tension is exactly where we're going to have to look at. If Hashem rules the world, what do we need a temple for? Right? Why are we building him a temple? If Hashem is making very, very clear. I'll give you another pasuk. This is the worst PR campaign in the history of man. Okay, Shlomo just gathered the equivalent today in billions of philanthropic dollars and manpower and international workforce. Okay, and this is what he says after not just 7. The temple, the Mikdash took 7 years to build. He built his own palace for 13 years. So it's a total of 20 years of construction. And then Shlomo Melech gets up in front of the entire group. It's really essentially the entire nation that's gathered there. And he says as follows, go to Melachim Aleph, Perek Chet. And it says, and Shlomo says the following words to all of Israel. Ki ha'umnam yeshev Elokim al haaretz, hine hashamayim u'shmei hashamayim lo yachal kelucha. Chaf Zion, verse 27. Af ki habayit hazeh asher baniti. Right? Even this house can't actually fit, right? And fit is not even the right word, can't contain God. Ufaniti el tfilat avdecha el tchinato Hashem Elokai lishmoa el harinav el tfilah asher avdecha mitpalel fanecha hayom. Right? Liyot inecha ptuchot el habayit hazeh laila vayom. Shlomo is making very clear, this physical abode can't contain God, but despite that, he's asking Hashem to pay attention when the people gather there.
So contrast that to the Mishkan, the tabernacle, which did, in a sense, have more symbolism of God, because you had at the same time of the Mishkan, you also had the cloud. That
Okay, so we're going to see, hold that, we're going to see the cloud goes into the Beit HaMikdash as well.
Yeah, but we didn't need the temple, but we were commanded to build Mishkan.
Yes and okay, so hold that. We're going to get to it. I don't think that either one was. The question is who needs. You're a bit biased. We haven't noticed. I will say, I think the question that we have to ask, and this will be, sort of come up, is who needed the Mikdash? Is it God or is it us? And that's a really important distinction, and that's going to be a critical distinction between our theology and the ancient world. Right? Did Hashem need the Mishkan or did we need the Mishkan?
Or did we need the building of it because we built the Mishkan?
That's what I'm saying. Right, but they're one and the same.
Mishkan has a building already built, but it wasn't a building.
It was a house of God, so to speak. Right? It was where we believed Hashem was.
The idea of building Was the building of the Mishkan part of the building of the nation as we left Egypt?
Oh, okay, but that's already, an interpretation.
But it goes together.
Perhaps.
Because building and better, the north and better sun are the.
Okay. So now I'll pause it there. What you're saying is beautiful. I don't know. I want to just stay on the, sort of on the, I guess, more literal interpretation of the, okay. So everyone go to Yeshayahu Vav just for 1 second. Okay. And look at the language here, because there's something really, really interesting that I want you to sort of keep an eye on, because we're going to get back to it in exactly 30 seconds. Yeshayahu Vav is a really interesting, it's the theophany. It's the first time Hashem appears to Yeshayahu. It's interesting because it happens here and not in Parak Aleph. It's out of order, but it's this first time Hashem appears to Yeshayahu, and the description is as if he's getting this nivuah in the Mikdash. The Mikdash is filled with Hashan. It's filled with smoke. Okay, and there's these srafim, these angels or angelic beings that are hovering around, and they're flapping their wings, and listen to what they're saying. Pasuk Gimel, v'kara ze el ze v'amar, these angelic beings are saying one to the other, Kadosh, 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 Hashem tzvakot, milo kol haaretz kivodo. Right, so in the Mikdash itself, they're saying that, and if you look just at the very, very beginning, even of what Yeshayahu describes that he sees, it says, "Bishnat mot hamelech," in pasuk Aleph, "Bishnat mot hamelech Uziyahu, ve'et Hashem yoshev al kisei ram v'nisa." He sees him on this exalted seat. V'shulav milei imet ha'echal. Now, is it the bottom of his robes? Is it his feet? Whatever it is, it's not Hashem, because Hashem's presence, melo kol haaretz kivodo, but his feet are sort of there. There's a sense that there's some connection between Hashem up there and Hashem down here. Okay, so now let's go back to Breshit. And now I want you to tell me, the Breshit tells us, right? It describes God's creation functionally of the universe. And then it talks about Hashem sort of ceasing creation of that ordering, so Hashem can be enthroned in his universe and rule from the temple, which is his entire universe in Breshit. Okay, so then the question is, why is day 7 so significant? Right? What's happening in day 7? All the rest of creation is about all those things that are being created for man. And then day 7 reminds us that what? Right? The grass is there for us to eat, and the animals are there for us for the products that they give us, and the water is there to water the lands that we can eat. Day 7 flips it and reminds us that what? All the things on this earth are for us, but ultimately, what? It's all really, right? It sort of flips the lens. It's really all God's temple or God's palace, right? So all these things here on this earth are for us to benefit from, but ultimately we, as part of this cosmos, are all really God's temple. And so it flips it. Everything in the days of creation are sort of from the what we call the anthropocentric perspective, right? It's all about us, how we see the sun, how we see vegetation, how we see water. And then day 7 reminds us God is now looking at the order he created, and he is now going to rule his universe, right? He has now been enthroned. And that's why the similarities between, if you go back to these sheets, between the building of the Mishkan and the building of, and the creation of the world are so obvious, right? Because the building of the temple, it wasn't the physical building of the materials. That's like putting together the hardware for a computer. None of that is important. What's important? What happens? Day 7 is the same as the Chanukata Mishkan, because what happens? Go back to Shmot Mem. When we finish the building, we can liken the building of the Mishkan to the 6 days of creation. We're putting everything into place. All the hard, right? All the materials are there. But then what happens? What is the pinnacle? What is day 7? Look, for example, right? If you start, I'll give you to move back a little bit. Parak Lamed Hey, we're watching everything being constructed. Right, we're watching everything being built, and then we move on to the next phase. All the way through, you get till Parak Lamed Tet, and in chapter 39, Moshe inspects it. right? And Moshe looks around and he judges it worthy of blessing and worthy of, right? He puts things into place. He anoints them. He creates sacred space. Everything is consecrated. And then what happens? Go to Perek Mem. What happens in Perek Mem? Start, for example, right? Pasuk 9, V'lakachta shemen hamishcha. He's consecrating everything. The inauguration is complete. What's day 7? In the Chanukat HaMishkan. Find it for me. You can jump towards the very, very end of the parak. End of the parak is the equivalent of Shabbat. What is it? Go to Pasuk Chaf Lamed Daled 34. Okay. Everything is built. It's all in place. The computer is still not functional until Vayichas He'anan et Ohel Moed Uchvod Hashem Malay et HaMishkan. Right? Kvod Hashem, right? Mlo kol haaretz kivodo. Kvod Hashem now fills up the Mishkan. V'lo yachol Moshe lavo el Ohel Moed. Ki shachan alav he'anan uvod Hashem malei et hamishkan. And even Moshe couldn't go in because Kvod Hashem is now there. And we're going to get to this in the coming weeks. Once something is filled with holiness, Hashem is holy, right? Kadoshim tiyu ki kadosh ani Hashem Elokechem. Once something is holy, now we have to be very careful not to mix it with the profane. Okay, and so Moshe cannot go in. Okay, I'm not reading it inside now, but when we get to Shlomo building the Mikdash, the exact same things happens. When Shlomo builds, actually, we can read it now very quickly. Why not? We have 30 seconds left. Back to Melachim Chet. You see the exact same thing. Look inside. Okay, and it says as follows. Go to. Yeah, I'm trying to find it because I actually was going to skip it today, but since we have an extra minute, I want to look at it inside really quickly with you guys. Give me 30 seconds. It is in Perek Bet. No, okay, so I'm not finding it and I don't want to waste your time. It's in Perek Chet, and Moshe and Shlomo essentially moves back and Hashem moves into the Mikdash. And it says there the words, and I really apologize, I should have had it prepared, moves in, Hashem moves into the Mishkan. Hashem actually moves in, and once he is in, then only the Kohanim are allowed to be there after that. Okay, here it is. Start in Pasuk Vav, verse 6. Vayaviu Kohanim, right? It says Vamelech Shlomo, they're all standing outside, they're dedicating it, it's all being, right? They're cutting the ribbon. Vayaviu Pasuk Vav et HaKohanim et Aron Brit Hashem el Mikomo, and we're going to spend a class on the concept of the Aron and what the Aron was, right? Why is it that with the Aron comes Hashem? El Mikomo el Dvir Habayit el Kodesh HaKodashim el Tachat Kanfei HaKruvim Ki HaKruvim Porsim Knafayim al Makom HaAron Vayasoku HaKruvim al HaAron Val Badav Milamala. And then it explains Vaya Arichu Habadim Vayira'u Rashi Habadim in HaKodesh al Pnei HaDavir Lo Yira'u Achutza, etc., etc. Ein Ba'aron Rak Shnei Luchot Avanim, which we're going to talk about. Vayihi, next pasuk Yud, Vayihi B'tzeit HaKohanim min HaKodesh V'ha'anan Malei et Beit Hashem. Lo yachlu HaKohanim la'amod l'sharet mipnei ha'anan ki malei kvod Hashem et Beit Hashem. Okay, so the consecration of the temple, the dedication of the temple is a microcosm of Shabbos. On seventh day, the seventh day is not wasted space, right? Like you were saying, so it's not wasted day. Seventh day is not empty. Seventh day is actually when everything begins. It's when Hashem starts. It's the day you turn that computer on and you actually start using it. It's the pinnacle of creation. Yeah.
So I understand 7 as Teva.
Yeah.
And 8 like Shmon's like mountain.
Okay.
So if 7 is Teva, you're taking the 6 days that were like the structure of things, and now you're taking it up a level of.
Now you're starting to use it.
Right, but it's God's, the earth, everything is God's temple.
Correct.
And that's nature.
Correct. The entire physical world that we look at and we experience is Hashem's. That's exactly it.
Integrated that.
100%. And that's why in this, right, that's why we're all integrated pieces of this whole thing that Hashem rules over. So the Mikdash is the microcosm of that. Right? We're not saying Hashem is, everyone makes very clear, Shlomo HaMelech himself, who built it, says this is not a place to contain Hashem, but it becomes a microcosm of Hashem's rule over the universe. So what we're going to have to try to begin to look at is how the Mikdash functions, how it was understood, and also what we're going to start to look at is some of the misunderstandings that ironically the temple generates. Right. One of the things that happens sometimes is we forget to distinguish between the micro and the macro. And sometimes we begin to think that the micro is the thing. Okay. And we're going to have to talk about that and we're going to see how it develops and we're going to see some of the clashes that arise. But next week, we're going to look more just at the furnishings and some of the symbolism, which is really cool because it's stuff that's totally lost on us. Okay. So we will begin next week and have a great day. And I apologize. I will have a voice again next week. You'll be able to hear me loud and clear. Oh, any questions from the Zoom? I can't even see it. No. If anyone who's home on Zoom, if you have the option to unmute yourselves and ask questions, by all means.
So you know what, ask Yael, ask the next time you have it on the big screen, turn around, and then you can answer the questions from the microphone.
Ah,
Because we don't see the Zoom.
right. Okay.
I mean, it's one of the reasons why I think it is.
Yeah, it's very hard. It's very hard.